Okay, so now I want to just summarize how everything is interconnected, because there are so many different things going on, and I just wanted to really show you the flow once again of what is going on. Okay, so we could go through the flow from different directions, but in the end, I'm just going to start at one point and just go from there. Okay, I'm going to start from the UI side of things and then go through what is going on in the background. So we start always in our main activity. Let's go over to our main activity, because this is the starting point of our application. So here we have the main activity. In the onCreate, we display the app theme, we display the surface, which gives us a background, and its content is basically what we can see on the screen. And we say we want our recipe screen composable to be as the focus of the screen, or want it to be displayed on the screen. So now here inside of the recipe screen, we get the view model, or we set up the main view model and the view state, because we need those two in order to display something on the screen. So the view state gives us information about whether we have loaded the data that we want to display or not, because have we loaded the categories or have we not? If we have not loaded them, then we're currently in the loading state. Then we should display this progress indicator, which is a running circle. You might have seen it when you download something and it just runs like this in a circular format. If we get an error, we display the error. Otherwise, let's display the category screen with the list that we loaded. Now, before we get into what we loaded, let's look at what our main view model does, because we also have this main view model. Now, what does the main view model do? Well, it takes care of basically getting us the information from the data side to the UI side. So it's really connecting the view with the model, and the model is what we get from the internet. So we create this variable called category state, and it should be called the categories state because it has the state of the categories. Now this contains the recipe state. So the recipe state is this data class which just holds information about whether we're currently loading or not. Then it contains the list, if there is a list that is not empty. So if we have the list, then it contains this list as a type of categories. So there are a bunch of individual category items inside of this list. And then it contains information about the error. So this state, we just use it so that we can use this mutable state of, which then activates when changes to that state happen, the user interface. So basically activates changes in the user interface. So basically what we see on the screen. So then we create this variable as a private variable, right? In order to expose it to the outside, we're creating this category state variable, which is going to be a state recipe state. And we pass our category state to it. Then we have this function called fetch categories. So we call this function the moment our main view model is loaded, which happens in the recipe screen, right? Here we are loading the main view model. All right. So then we are launching a coroutine. So inside of fetch categories, we are launching the coroutine, which allows us to call functions that are suspend functions. So functions that don't happen synchronously, but they happen asynchronously. So they happen in the background, so to speak. And that's why we need to use this view model scope.launch, which allows us to launch coroutines, which then allows us to launch suspend functions, which we need to do because in order to get something from the internet, we need to put it into a suspend function. Now we're using a try and catch block because things could go wrong. We could have no internet connection, something could break or whatever. Okay, the internet connection could be bad, or the website could be bad, or the link could not work, or something like that. And then we get the category state value. And once we have gotten those categories, right, because we get the response, we know that things didn't go wrong because we are still in the try catch block. And if something did go wrong, we wouldn't even get to this line of code. So in this line of code, we're just saying, hey, take the current category state value and override it with the response that you have gotten, and to get all of those categories that you get from the response into this list. What is this category response? Well, the response is basically what we get from here, from our suspend function get categories, which uses retrofit to basically take this URL and add this piece of the URL. So in the end, you would have a URL like this with this piece here, like so. And if we go to this URL, we see what we get. We get this big piece of information. So now what we're doing is we are getting this response and we are putting it into a list of categories. So this recipe service basically just allows us to use retrofit to create based on this URL that used this API service in combination. So it basically combined them together. It allows us to use this recipe service now outside, which we do at this point where we get the response. So we use the service, we get the categories, we populate the categories to the state, and the state, as I said earlier, is taking care of updating the UI, letting it know that things have changed, and we populate the list with those categories. We're saying we're not loading anymore, we're saying we don't have an error. In case something did go wrong, we're saying, okay, we're not loading anymore, but we do have an error. And yeah, this recipe state, as I said earlier, is taken care of, allowing us to basically store a value inside of a variable and then updating the UI based on it. So the categories response is just a list of categories, but this categories response is basically this entire file. So this entire thing, everything in here, this entire JSON object is our response. So this whole thing is the categories response. Now, in order to make it more readable, we did use JSON formatter, which allows us to display the categories in a format that we can read it better. So we see categories is a list because it has a squared bracket and it contains a bunch of individual objects that are separated by a comma. Each object has certain member variables or parameters, you could call them. So this is key value pairs as well, but basically each parameter has a value assigned to it. So we have key value pairs where basically we know that each category has an ID, has a name, has a image URL, so the location on the internet where the image is stored, and a description. Now we are getting this entire file and breaking it down into individual Kotlin objects that are of type category. So we create a list out of this whole file, and inside of this list we have individual category items now, or objects. Now we can use those category objects to display them inside of our screen, and that is that we get this from the state. We know that we are using this categories state, which is of type recipe state, which contains the list. So the list basically goes this entire flow of being loaded from the internet, going through this whole state process and all of that, like being launched through our suspend function inside of our coroutine, as being assigned to that list, then going moving over to where it actually is being displayed or used, and that is inside of our category screen. So here we have set up when we are not loading and we don't have an error, then we know that we have the list, because then we know that our view state has a list associated with it. That's how the structure of our code was basically. Now this view state contains the list, and we are passing that list, which is basically our list of categories, all of the individual categories, and we're passing it to the category screen, which then uses this lazy vertical grid that has 2 columns. That's what this part here says, and takes the entire screen size. And each individual item inside of categories, so we're saying items, and the items that we look at are the categories, which is a list of category. For each individual item, which is of type category, well, which has the name category, we say create a category item composable where the category property or parameter is the individual category that we're looking at for this particular iteration of this item's execution. So if we look at this, basically saying for every single category item, execute this code. And this code creates a new composable for every single category's item, which has the following information. It just says, have an image and have a text. So if you wanted to change what's displayed in every single one of those, you could say, let's just do it here, blah, blah, just to show you that this is how we modify how every single one of those items looks like. So that's what this category item did for us. So now it will display blah, blah in every single one of them. So you see, image, blah, blah, beef, chicken, blah, blah, chicken image, blah, blah, chicken. So yeah, that's basically how everything is coming together. And for the text, we say, hey, give me that category and use that category to be displayed here. And for the image, we're saying, hey, give me that category, and I'm going to use this property called string category thumb, which is basically a URL, just a link to a website which contains the image. And using this remember async image painter, which is absolutely mind-blowing that this exists, is enabling us to load an image with just one line of code. And I am absolutely in awe how great that is, because I recall how it was in the past, and it was so much code that we needed to just display a freaking image from the internet. So nowadays it's so much easier. So that's basically the flow of our application. That's how the data is being loaded, how everything is coming together, how it's in the end being displayed. And I hope you enjoyed this little project. So I'd say let's pack it up and see you in the next video where we're going to summarize today.